about your question. What about the doctor? He has a patient who is going to die according to the doctor's knowledge if he is not being operated. Should he do the operation anyway without asking the patient?
It's again, if it's a standard operation.
It's not a standard.
You could die after a tonsillectomy.
Yeah. It's not a standard of operation. Like his heart is failed, and he has a few hours to live, and he can transplant the heart or whatever.
As I said, the standard procedures have to be done. Non-standard procedures, you can use your judgment. That's the only answer I can give.
Another question is, what about transgender operations? Transgender operations.
That's not related.
No, it relates to the completion. If it's forbidden, then you can say it's...
You're not allowed to change the sex of an individual. That the halakha prohibits. The details of this are complicated. Now we come to the other side of the story. The Torah God commands us as Kadosh in Valiko Yutet Yutet. It says, as Chukotai Tishmo, protect my laws. And the sages say that refers to laws of nature, that we have to preserve the species. God created the animal world according to and plant. All the living objects were created according to certain species, and you have to preserve those species as they are and not change from one species to the other. That's called kilayim. This going from one to the other. And the question is, does that apply to genetic engineering? In genetic engineering, you take parts of molecules from one species and transplant them into another species. And the question is, does that fall into the category of Chukotai Tishmo? That's essentially the basic question. Now, I looked in the encyclopedia, medical and halachic encyclopedia of medical encyclopedia of halacha of Steinberg. Dr. Steinberg wrote a whole encyclopedia. What does he say about genetic engineering?
Can I ask you something?
Sure.
How about cosmetic surgery? Somebody wants to be looking better in his nose or the things that changes.
That again, is if it's really a severe case, there's no action that is permitted. Like somebody was injured in a fire and is fixing up that, it's all right. On the other hand, if it's not really necessary, then it should not be done. It's again, you have to use your judgment. There are both opinions on both sides.
There goes my face.
Now here he says that there are some who say that the Torah forbids only things which are visible. If they're invisible, the Torah doesn't forbid them. For instance, we're allowed to drink water even though there are protozoans in there, there are animals in there. The animals are invisible, I'm allowed to drink the water. So there's some who claim that when you transplant parts of a molecule from one to the other, that's invisible, and therefore there can be no restrictions on it. But the more outstanding halachic authorities like Shlomo Zalman Auerbach He has a very important responsible on this issue, and he says no. In this case, where the whole activity is on the invisible plane, there that is certainly the laws apply to it. So if it were a question of kilayim, of mixing species, it might be forbidden. He says, so this does not apply.
In operations, the same?
And
In medical operations, is it the same?
what operation?
Is it the same rule that you cannot like take an organ or a part from a woman and implant it to a man, or vice versa?
That's not mixing species, but that's something else again. That's a different
It's
question.
a good question, topic.
Why not?
Uh,
Why not? A
It's
heart
the
is a
same
heart.
species.
A heart, a kidney is a kidney. Why is that?
Right, I say that. No, he says an ovum from a woman into a man.
An ovum, you said?
No, I
That's what
said
he has.
some part, it doesn't matter.
Take anything.
But what?
On the other hand, there are those who argue that it is similar to Kilai. The laws of Kilai do apply, and you're not allowed to do genetic engineering. He cites some people such as one who was Rosh Hashiva in Chicago. His name is Rav Herschler, Moshe Herschler, who doesn't permit it. And he quotes also Shevet Levy, that's Rav Wozner, who's a great posek, but actually what he forbade was changing the nature of a certain kosher fish, a fish which is kosher and allowed, because it has scales, and to genetically transform it to be without scales. That, he says, is forbidden. And that does not mean that all genetic engineering is forbidden. This is a special case because it can lead to great confusion. After a while, you're allowed to eat the fish, even though it has no scales. Then people think other fish have no scales also can be eaten.
How about the opposite? If you have a fish who has no scales and he makes scales?
Same, presumably the same law would apply, that you're not allowed to.
Aren't there certain
But
species
on the other hand,
which changed over hundreds of thousands of years, who at one time maybe was not kosher, now kosher? Was there such a thing?
if you observe a kosher fish producing offspring, the offspring is permitted. If you have a non-kosher animal, it has offspring, the offspring is forbidden. What happens after 1,000 generations, that question doesn't come up.
You said Rav Steinberg, Dr. Steinberg wrote this.
Yes.
Does he live in Israel?
Yes, and
Yes.
Charlotte.
Charlotte Center?